Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third edition of the Energy and Resource Forum. It is with great pleasure that we stand here today as we get together to explore pathways towards a more sustainable future. On behalf of the whole organizing committee and of the Zero Emission Group, we want to welcome all of you to this exciting day here at Rolex Forum. Before we start off the event, we would like to take some time to thank all the people who have contributed to this exciting journey. In particular, we want to thank our sponsors, Service Industriel de Lausanne, Swiss Federal Office of Energy, Vice Presidency for Responsible Transformation, and the Enterprise for Society Center. Their generous support made this event possible. Furthermore, we'd like to thank all the speakers and experts for their valuable time and contribution. Without you, this forum would not be half as exciting. Thank you. We also thank our today's moderator, Karin Frey. Karin has worked for the Swiss National Radio and Television for almost 30 years, and in particular, she already moderated last year's forum and left no doubts that she is really the perfect fit for today's event. We're pleased to have you as our moderator today. Lastly, we would like to thank you, our audience, for coming today and for contributing to this exchange of ideas and perspectives. This forum shall be a collaborative space where every voice matters, and we encourage you to actively participate, ask questions, approach the speakers, and get in touch with each other.
As we look around us today, the signs of climate change are undeniable. We are witnessing its effects on agriculture, water resources, public health, and economies worldwide. Climate change is not a distant threat anymore. It has become a present reality that affects us all, regardless of our geography and regardless of our national boundaries. The time for hesitation has passed, and climate action is not negotiable anymore. Our action is needed. It is needed now, and it is needed fast. Fortunately, we have the tools, the technology, and knowledge to mitigate the impacts of climate change and build a more sustainable future. Throughout this forum, we will have the privilege of hearing from esteemed speakers, experts, who will share their insight, research, and experience on how we can make the energy transition happen. Together, we will dive into topics ranging from renewable energy technologies to sustainable resource management, and from innovation and policymaking in the energy sector to the creation of a more inclusive society with people's well-being at the core of our actions. And last but not least, I'd like to warmly thank the whole ERF team, Jonas, Lorenzo, Horea, Jennifer, all the others, Robin. Like, really, you've done a tremendous job, guys, so I really think they deserve a loud round of applause. Thank you so much. Now, with this being said, let's get ready to dive into the topic with our very first panel on the grid integration of renewable energy conversion technologies. Karin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Jonas Schweiger and Rafa Mosca of the Zero Emission Group. It's always a pleasure to host this event. It's actually the third time, and it's amazing what they can put together, students at EPFL. I mean, very often events like this, or normally this is done by professional events organizing people. And I remember the first time they phoned me up, it was right before the lockdown, and they phoned me and said, Karin, we heard you do stuff like that. Could you host our conference next month? And I said, that's short notice. You have to come half a year earlier if you want something from me. So then COVID came, the lockdown came, and 2 weeks later my phone rings again. And they said, do you have time now? So I did, and the first one was online. Then this is now the second one in real life, and I'm always very much in awe. And actually, I wanted to do the big round of applause for the Zero Emission Group. I think we can do it another time, or a second time. Please, a warm applause for the Zero Emission Group. So I'm really pleased to be here. We're going to have 4 panels. The first, can we power the world with 100% renewable energy? The second will be on the resources, the materials, lithium, cobalt, all of those materials. What about the situation there? The third panel is going to be on the future of land transport. And then the last debate towards the evening is going to be on the economical side of the whole thing, growth, degrowth, and what there is to do. Also, there are going to be 2 wonderful workshops you can take part in. That's in the later afternoon. For now, we're going to head right on into the first topic. Can we power the world with 100% renewable energy? And I'm looking into the audience, and I'd love to see your hands. Who thinks we can? Who says, yes, we can do that? Can I see hands? A lot of people who like technology, since we're at EPFL. Okay, let me see who says, nah, not gonna happen. Okay, still a few hands, still a few hands. Well, we're going to discuss the details, and we'll discuss it also with you. I've got this funky cube here. It's a microphone, and when you want to speak up during the panel, just raise your hand and I will toss it over. It's not going to break, but it's going to be important that once you've asked your question, hand it on then to the next person raising their hand. Let's see if it works out. I'm really, really looking forward to this with you, and also with our esteemed speakers. And I'm now going to give the stage to a man who has been dealing with energy transition for many years. As a politician, he's a member of parliament, he's a national council for the Socialist Party, but he's also dealt with the topic as a board member and as an author. And as such, I am thrilled to hear him talk about his latest book and, of course, also about some policy making. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me Roger Nordman.
Well, hello everybody. Thanks for being here and interested in this topic. I will present you part not of the world transition, but of the Swiss transition as I see it, but maybe there are some lessons also we can take for the broader scope. I will just shortly remember the classic, housing and mobility, then electricity with focus summer-winter, because in Switzerland it's the critical aspect, because we use more electricity in winter and produce more in summer. The challenge of decarbonizing industry, it's a field with few explored, and it's a key aspect of my book. And then the synergies between industry decarbonization and the winter electricity supply. It's surprising, I was myself a little bit surprised making this. And then the power generation mix we need. First of all, very important reminder, about 80% of greenhouse gas emitted in Switzerland, on the territory of Switzerland, are from burning fossil energy, inclusive garbage, plastic. And second point, in this presentation I focus on technology, but more or less technology can only solve 2/3 of the climate question. And the last third has to be solved with behavior or changing behavior and changing consumption. Yes, the classic. Well, first of all, heating here, you have a classical house with an electric heating boiler or with oil heating. You need 4 kWh to get 4 kWh heat. If you go to a heat pump, it's enough to buy 1 kWh electricity to have 4 kW heat, because you use 3 from the outside, from the environment. It can be It can be 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, depending on the plant, but it's very efficient, but you need more electricity. And for Switzerland, if you count that you will improve the insulation of houses and also use non-electrical heat, you will need around 6 terawatt-hour more electricity, and winter, it's mostly in winter. But you have a huge gain of efficiency. The same by the electrical engine. If you go pass up with your car to have 20 kilowatt-hour in the wheels, you use 80 kilowatt-hour because basically your car is a heating plant who produce accessorily some movement. If you go to the electric car, you have a much higher efficiency, around 90%, and that's the reason why you going from the internal engine to the electrical engine is a huge win in efficiency. More or less for electrifying everything in Switzerland who is on the ground, also trucks and so on, also agricultural stuff and so on, you need 17 terawatt-hour electricity. And then we actually still have 20 terawatt-hour of nuclear power generation, end of the life. They are all between 40 years for Leibstadt and 55 years for Betznau. They are very old and they have to be replaced. So you see, we will need a huge quantity of electricity. What is the actual situation of electricity? Here you have 20 last winter, until winter 21-22. And you see, this is the consumption line. This is the production of hydro storage, of hydro run of the river, the nuclear power plant, and the new renewable. And you see there is a lack that we are importing. One, in 1920, we exported a little bit, but it's an exception. Mostly we import. On some winter, we go to 10 terawatt-hour import. It's always a winter when you have a problem with the nuclear power plant. It was Leibstadt who had a problem here, and also here Leibstadt had a problem. And you see, this is mainly the winter we are importing. Importing 5 terawatt-hour is not a problem for our net, but it can, if you import more, it's a problem. In summer, you have exactly the opposite situation because of the huge run of the water production. And here we export, because the consumption is lower. There is one very interesting fact in this. In the 15 last years, there were no increase of electricity consumption. And this is a huge progress because in the last century it was always increasing. And it's due to different improve of efficiency, even if population and GDP are growing. It's a very interesting features. And so if you see this situation, for going to zero net, excluding aviation, is not in, you have to replace the declining nuclear power. You have to have 6 terawatt-hour, mainly in winter, for the heating. You have to have around 70 terawatt-hour for the mobility. It's evenly spread on the season of mobility. You drive the same in summer and winter. You have to decarbonize industry, and I will come on it. And you have to avoid to use fossil fuel to generate electricity in winter. So, as a matter of fact, it's a huge challenge. You have to invest massively in the electricity system. And now, we never discussed the challenge of industry. And how is industry using energy? 80 terawatt for the electricity. It's not, they can take for granted that it's renewable or at least defossilized. Then you have a second block, about 5 terawatt-hour of wood, environmental and solar heat, and remote heating. It's okay. And then you have a third block, which is waste, mostly old tire. Then fossil fuel. Now a little bit, this was 19. This was just last year before Corona because of it was the last stable year. And then you have fossil gas, and the last is coal. We have a little bit coal for cement factories. And the key problem is how to substitute those 17 terawatt-hour fossil energy. And you have to understand how it works. You have to look at the energy use in the industry. And you see that about 1/3 of the energy is for making of 1/3 of the heating energy is for making water up to 100 degree. And then the rest is higher. And here you have, for 400 to 800 degree, you have a huge block. But more or less, you can say the most important 1/3 is under 100 degree. You can make it with heat pumps, and higher is very difficult to make it with a heat pump. And then you can obviously consider the two problems separately, having enough electricity in winter and decarbonize the industry. Or you can consider them together. First, if you consider them separately, for the industry, you have 17 terawatt of fossil energy. You need syngas to use it, so you need 34 terawatt-hour of electricity, because making syngas, you least around half of the energy in the transformation process, electrolysis and so on, pressure and so on. And then to avoid an electricity shortfall in winter, if you accept that the land transportation and building are decarbonized and that you have 50 gigawatt photovoltaics, you need 10 terawatt-hour more electricity for the winter. It means 20 terawatt of syngas produced in the summer and stored for the winter. And then to produce those 20 terawatt-hour syngas, you need 40 terawatt-hour electricity because of the loss of 50%, more or less. So that if you take this way, you need 74 terawatt-hour of electricity just for industry and winter, just for the syngas for industry, for the winter electricity supply. And it's an enormous quantity, and it's very unrealistic. And you understand the problem is the inefficiency of the conversion from electricity to syngas and from syngas to electricity. And I propose another way, and this is the key aspect of my book. I say, more or less, in the winter, you have to harvest enough energy, enough renewable energy directly during the winter, and almost never use gas. And the syngas is produced mostly in the summer and stored for the winter need of the industry. And you almost never convert syngas in electricity. On the summer electricity surplus, you can use it directly in the industry, or just in time as syngas to make hydrogen and then use it in the industry, but without seasonal storage, which is very expensive and complicated. And how does it work in the details? You remember 17 terawatt-hour energy in the industry. And here you have the part who is up to 100 degrees, you say high temperature heat pumps, and instead of 5, you need only 2.5 terawatt-hour, but two-thirds in the winter, because part of this is heating the industry buildings. Then you have the high temperature over 100 degrees in the summer. A part of the part of the gas fossil gas can be directly substituted with electricity. In summer, you have enough electricity. You just take a heat corp and make high temperature. And for the second half of this electricity, of this fossil energy, sorry, you can make hydrogen and then use hydrogen. You need more or less 5 terawatt-hour of electricity to make the hydrogen. This is necessary where you cannot use electricity. Part of the high temperature process need gas. It doesn't work with electricity. And then for the winter, you have to replace 6 terawatt-hour of industrial heat over 100 degree. And it need more or less 12 terawatt of syngas that you store from the summer in the winter. And you see, interesting, most of the need is in the summer for electricity, in the summer. And the idea is the syngas is reserved mostly for the, is mostly reserved for the industry. And the mix is existing hydropower, biomass, 1,000 machines of wind power, the 2 additional hydro storage are decided, it's a votation that we will have in June, and 72 gigawatt of photovoltaics, some of them in the Alps. Currently, we are about 7% of the roof potential is used. And how does it work? This is the actual situation in an average of 11 years, of the last 11 years. I am in time after the fade-off of the actual nuclear power plant, and with this development, huge solar and few winds. And in winter, you have also the hydro storage, so the importation we have on the blue, it's the gas, electricity with gas, very few. And you see we have a problem, we have more electricity in summer than in winter. And this is the actual use of electricity, and this is the key point. You have, in addition, all we need for making gas to store for the winter, for direct electricity use, for hydrogen in the summer, and also this is mobility. And in winter, you have mostly also mobility, few gas is directly done, and a lot of electricity for heating. And then you see globally, you have the summer use of electricity is much higher, and you have only a few not used electricity, peak shaved or exported. And then you have a matching of supply on the demand over the season. Over 1 year, it looks like this. This is the production on all the demand, and you see in summer you have less consumption than in winter by now, and after the transformation, it's exactly the opposite. You have more consumption in winter. And then you have the storage of gas, which is obviously like the water storage, full at the end of the summer, empty at the end of the spring, or at the beginning of the spring. And you see this strategy is a highly efficiency strategy because the overall consumption, except aviation, goes from 190 to 120 consumption, mainly because we reduced to zero oil on gas. And this is an efficiency strategy. It doesn't solve the question of flying because it would be very difficult to make enough neutral kerosene in Switzerland. And obviously, there is a lot to invest. This is the second focus of my book because I have, in the book, I also take all the economical aspect, how much it costs, how much to share the burden, and so on. But it was impossible to present everything this morning, so I chose to present more the technical aspect. Thanks for your presentation. And if you want, I have 4 exemplars of the books if someone wants. It's 25 francs. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Roger Nordman. One little question before you get to take the seat. I saw we need 1,000 machines or wind turbines. So, I mean, the Swiss population always says no.
No, it's not. Romande Energie, Mr. Petit just inaugurated a lot of wind turbines in Sainte-Croix. Well, the processing were 23 years, building 2 years. So we have to improve the procedure, but we also passed recently a law to improve the speed for the first terawatt hour of production. And the key element, I didn't say it, but wind produced 2/3 in the winter. And therefore, it's very attractive to have a little bit wind production in Switzerland because we have a winter problem mostly.
So you say 1,000 machines, feasibility, we can do it?
We can do it, yes.
All right.
I didn't say 10,000, I said thousands.
Did I say 10? I meant 1,000.
No.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So one of the big points when we're talking about can we do it with 100% renewables are the grids. Are they fit? Are they ready to change from one energy system to another when different types of energies come in, or maybe the electricity doesn't just flow in one direction, but it has to go in two directions. What does the grid situation look like? I'm very happy to have the man here who will give us the insights. He is a professor and he is the chair, and now comes a difficult name, the chair of the Distributed Electrical Systems Laboratory. In other words, he's been working for about 3 decades in the field of energy systems planning and operation, and as I said, one of the core fields he is in is electrical power grids. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me Mario Paolone.
Thank you, Karen, for the very kind introduction. Welcome, everybody. I see many of my students, PhDs and undergraduate students in the room, which is very good. At this time, normally I give one of my lectures, so I keep with the same kind of mindset to still try to transfer some know-how that I acquired in the last years on a very timely subject, namely how can we adapt grids to host a sufficient amount of renewables like the one that Mr. Nordman just presented. Normally, we have the attitude of considering power grids to be what we call a copper plate. So essentially, you can plug in how much you want without any restriction. I will show you that is not really the case. So here I took a perspective which is the European one, not only the Swiss one. So this graph is showing many information. So the top gray ellipses is the increase of the demand, and these are thousands of terawatt hours at European level. So essentially from 2020 to 2050, we expect an increase of 2x in the demand, and Roger gave you some justifications about that. What are the blue bars here? So this is the production of electricity from standard assets, the dark blue ones, those that are controllable, hydro, nuclear, fossil fuel as well. And the light blue are what we call stochastic or intermittent distributed generation. Now, the problem in this figure is that at the moment, the majority of the control variables are in our hands, okay? Although they are polluting a lot, okay? In 2050, the situation will be completely reversed with 5 times more intermittent and non-controllable silver generation that will constitute the majority of our electricity production. So what are the impacts on that? Sorry for the text, but let's try to focus on the keywords. So we are talking about heterogeneous, stochastic, distributed power generation in distribution systems, okay? So these 5 times more stochastic distributed generation will be impacting distribution systems. Not only, it will also impact transmission systems. Can we differentiate between impacts on transmission and distribution systems? Well, generally, yes. For transmission systems, basically the main challenges are the regulating reserves. So essentially the amount of power and energy we need to continuously balance the system. Whereas for distribution systems, the majority of the challenges are related to the reinforcement of the grids and the quality of the supply and dispatching capabilities, essentially the possibility of following a day-ahead trajectory to reduce the reserve at transmission level. I will clarify these concepts in a moment. Now, let's talk about reserves, okay? So what is this graph showing? So this graph is showing the evolution, this is millions of euros, okay, of the net imbalance netting market, which is essentially a process that at European level is quantifying somehow the frequency restoration reserve. So essentially one of the 3 reserves that we have in power systems to balance the grid. The interesting thing is that from 2010 to 2020, this market went from basically 0 to 600 millions a year. And this is only for the IGCC state members of Europe. So essentially what we are doing is to plug in renewables, uncontrollable, and let the reserve grow indefinitely. Is it the best approach? Probably not. But this is how the market functions nowadays, okay? Now, sorry for the many slides here and the many informations here. So on the left, you have a graph that is showing the typical evolution of the frequency of the grid when you have an imbalance, okay? So these are seconds and minutes. So essentially, when there is an imbalance in the system, we need to activate the reserve, in particular the containment, the restoration and replacement reserves that are separated in time to compensate for the imbalance that you have in the grid. Now, these imbalances can be generated either by what we call contingencies, so essentially the loss of a big power plant. So you have lack of generation, so you have to increase the injections of power from the reserves to keep the balance of the system. But interestingly enough, this kind of situation you can observe by looking at the transition of the hour each single day. And this is because the markets are not perfect. So the market is assuming that generation demand is perfectly matching, but this is not true, and this is happening all the time. So that's why we need more reserves, more of these guys to keep up everything spinning at the same frequency. Now the question is, as I said before, can we keep increasing this thing? Well, this is not really ideal because the majority of these reserves are gas-fired power plants. So essentially the bad guys. So in a study that you see the reference here, we show that if you dispatch, if you control the local distribution systems, instead of activating the reserve for these reasons, you achieve the same performance. So the blue curve is the energy not served as a function of the amount of distributed generation you have in the system. And the blue curve is by producing the reserve by standard means. And the blue dots you have, the black dots you have here, is by using controllable distributed generation and storage in the distribution system. So essentially, this slide is telling you you can achieve the same technical performance of centralized reserve by controlling local distribution systems. And the interesting thing is that this is scalable for even amount of distributed generation, which is reaching the global load that you have at distribution level. So technically and also economically, if you go to this study, we showcase that dispatching distribution systems is even more economical than providing the reserve using standard power plants, okay? This is a little bit more technical. This is really for those of you that are the geeks of the control. What we also show is that when you are phasing out from large power plant assets, you are losing spinning masses, these huge asynchronous generators that are providing what we call inertia to the system. The problem is that when you lose inertia, you can have frequency nadir, which is the least value of the frequency, that can really deep into the region that can make the system close to a blackout. What we show is that by using what we call grid-forming controls, you can actually mitigate these phenomena by just simple controls that you can embed into your distributed generation. So also this kind of problem can be solved by suitable controls in distributed generation units. Now, we said that transmission level, reserve can be solved as a problem. Let's talk about distribution systems. So one of the problems in distribution systems, here I'm particularly talking about Switzerland, is that we don't have a model of the distribution grid. We don't have it. Well, we have it, but let's say official one, no. Why? Because all the DSOs are competing each other, and also they don't share the models of their grids. I remind you that in Switzerland we have close to 700 DSOs, more or less. Probably are the country with the largest number of DSOs per capita in the world. So one of the problems was to generate large-scale synthetic models of distribution systems to quantify whether we can connect 50 or 60 gigawatt of PV and when we are reaching the bottlenecks of the distribution system. And unfortunately, we're reaching it very early. So what we did in my laboratory was to create this synthetic model. How? Well, this is the process that we use. So essentially, we first collected the extra high voltage location of the power stations. Then we create a Voronoi mapping of the Swiss territory where these high voltage stations are located, which is almost what is done in reality. Then the problem was to generate the electricity demand, that again is a proprietary information of the DSOs. We don't have access to it. However, it's possible to use as a proxy the heat demand that is, thanks God, available on map.geo.admin.ch and transform this heat demand, there is a nice paper about it, into electricity demand, okay? With a very low granularity, namely the granularity of a single building, which is quite interesting. So by having these two, we have also the boundary conditions at building levels, and what we can do with this electricity demand is to locate secondary substations according to the standard rules that are used by DSOs to locate secondary substations. And what we get eventually is a location of secondary substations, and then we applied standard routing techniques to connect all these dots that are the secondary substations using standard rules that are used by distribution systems operators. So what we get is a model of the Swiss distribution grid. And this is available on GitHub. It's open source, so you can download it. And many people in Switzerland are using it. So it's becoming a sort of standard for this kind of purposes. Now, let's see how can we use this model. Well, the very first approach is to say, okay, I wanted to quantify how much capacity of PV I can install in the system. When I'm reaching a congestion in the system or any constraints violation in the distribution system, what I do is to install what we call non-wired grid reinforcement via batteries. Why I'm using batteries? Because non-wired with grid reinforcement techniques are more interesting for the dispatching purposes, what I just introduced before. So these two figures are showing you, for some, these are 10 medium voltage grids that are randomly selected in the model that I show you. As a function of the PV installed power, you see that the total cost linearly increase, because linearly means that the more PV you put, the more the cost goes up. But at a certain point, there is an inflection point. Why? Because essentially you are congesting the system. Okay? Indeed, if you look at the marginal cost, essentially the marginal cost is constant, and for any single grid, there is a red dot where it is sharply increased. Why? Because you need to install batteries or reinforce the system. Okay? And then what we did was to say, okay, look at the uniform map, okay? I wanted to achieve a certain level of penetration of PV, and the question is, how much can I afford in the system before reinforcing it? Well, if you look at this graph, you can see that around 13 gigawatt of PV, so sorry, Roger, we have a problem. And the problem is that the distribution grid is getting congested. And this is when you start increasing the cost of the grid dramatically, okay? So here I'm showing you the cost of the PV and the cost of the battery plus PV. Then we said, okay, since we have this model, this very fancy one, why don't we, I'm finishing, why don't we try to have an incentive policy where instead of deploying PVs uniformly, we deploy them according to the constraints of the system and the availability of GHI. So essentially where the global horizontal irradiance is more favorable. And then we get two types of situations where essentially we showcase that having an optimal placement of the PV, although this is very complicated because you have to convince private owners that we favorize those that are living in Valais rather than those living in the brouillard, of installing more PV in their case because it's costing less. Also from the grid perspective, okay? So this is what we can have in terms of optimal placement in distribution systems. So these are the final remarks. Contribution from distribution systems to regulating power, it's fundamental. We need to have it. Otherwise, we'll keep up in having too much reserves, especially in the form of gas-fired plants. So if we want to go net zero, that's something we have to have. And we need this to be regulated by adequate grid codes and market mechanisms, which is not the case nowadays. Second point, dispatching distribution system hosting stochastic controllable resources is a potential that we have to leverage, again, for dispatching purposes. Last but not least, we need to have planning strategies for the large-scale deployment of stochastic grid modes. This is something that in terms of cost, we cannot neglect. As I showed you, unfortunately, the grid constraints will kick in quite early, and we do have mechanisms to take into account the grid reinforcement cost to solve the situation. With this, I finish my presentation, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mario Paolone. Before I let you take a seat on the panel, one question for you too. I mean, I have the impression you've got all the solutions. Does the industry listen to you?
I would say yes. You know that when I came at the EPFL, the chair of my laboratory was created by Romande Energie, SIL, SIG, so they trust in technology, and many of the solutions that we are developing are actually transferred to the industry in many forms, to the DSOs, to the TSOs, to startups, to large industry. So we're trying to provide solutions.
So the remaining question is, how much do you trust that it is going to be done?
I said to Christian also another time, we need more courage.
More courage?
Yeah.
From the DSOs or from whom?
From the power industry in general.
Okay, I think we'll take it from there. Please do take a seat, Mario, grazie mille. And then I'd like to have Roger Nordman come back on stage, and I also invite Nell Reimann. She originally studied electrical engineering at EPFL. She today wears two hats, a European one and a Swiss one. She is a board member of the ENTSO-E, which is the European Network of Transmission System Operators. Those are the guys with the big grids, national and internationally. And she's also a member of the executive board with Swiss Grid. Very warm welcome.
Thank you.
And then I'm also happy to have Christian Petit from Romande Energie with us. Mario mentioned it, he's the CEO of Romande Energie. By education, he's an economist. And as said, he's the DSO, so with his company, he's closer to the customer. Romande Energie produces and distributes, amongst other things, energy. Very warm welcome too. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've got the cube with me. Do not hesitate to raise your hand. I think we're just going to start the round, and I will start integrating you into the discussion. And I mean, it was a ramp. You handed it to me, Mario. Christian, the distributors need to be more courageous. It's a conservative industry, I claim.
Yes, it's a conservative industry, and we are serving sometimes conservative customers with conservative political bodies and conservative regulators. So we are a conservative
So it's the others?
country. No, it's us, but it's all of us. So we need to be all of us on the move, and I think it's a reverse courage we need. So when we talk to Mario, we get some impulse. When we dialogue with the political, we get to know each other and to better understand the frame that each other can create. When we talk to Swiss Grid, we have the full picture and the interaction with the European grid. And all these discussions are necessary today to create the movement and to give all of us the courage to move on.
So how courageous would you say, Roger Nordman, are the policymakers? I mean, one of the things that are said, they think short term instead of saying, hey, let's go full, let's forget about political differences, and let's forget about going more into the opposition. Let's do this together.
Yes, what we will see, we have on the 9th of June a vote on the new electricity law, who is very interesting exactly on this topic, because for the first time we have the possibility of have a value to flexibility, which means, as a matter of fact, that you can make peak shaving on solar production. And this was a key element of my last book, 2019, 4 years ago, where I said, you don't have to use and transport every photovoltaic kilowatt hour. It's worth to say in June or July, or in the middle of the day, you have too much electricity, and it would be too expensive to reinforce the grid or to store this energy. You just reduce the injection on the inverter, and you lose a very small percent of electricity, about maybe 3% if you reduce from 100 to 70, and only maybe 8% if you go to 50%. I've calculated it for every quarter of an hour over 3 years. So it's you have another possibility to optimize, but Mario is an engineer, so we want to use every kilowatt hour, and I am an economist, and I say the too expensive one, we don't use them. And this was accepted in this bill. I hope the Swiss population will accept this bill, because it laid the basic that the photovoltaic expansion is not expensive enough. There is another problem which is not solved in this bill, is the fact that the transportation grid and the distribution grid have to be allowed to store energy. Because in the European system, we have a full separation between energy and grids. And this is an historical reason, this is an economical model, a simplistic economical model or reason at the beginning of this. But as we see, it's like the train grid. You can not really separate the infrastructure from the train going on it, and it's exactly the same. And the Electricity Commission said we have to invest 40 billion Swiss francs in the grid in the next 30 years. And my thesis is invest half of this in grid and half of this in the decentral battery. But the battery has to be managed by the grids, not separately from the grid, because if you have too much electricity at one point, at one moment, then you can store it and transport it afterward. Or if you need too much electricity at one point, you can bring the electricity before, store it, and then use. And this allows to use very more efficiency the existing infrastructure. And this is, I think, a thing that we have to do, and we have to change in whole Europe the regulatory framework to achieve this.
I'd like to hand this one to Nella Reimann. Is that the problem, the separation, or that there's no market for storage, or that it's not with the grids?
No, I wouldn't say that's a problem per se, but I agree with Roger Nordman when he says that it's an issue when you separate production from transmission. And for instance, if I take an example for Swissgrid, we had an idea of putting solar panels on our substations because we had some roofs available, and we thought this would be a good idea. But we were told, no, that's not an option for you. It's not your role to have any production whatsoever, even if it's a small amount. You really have to clearly separate transmission from production, because we are unbundled. That's in the law. Yeah.
Yes, this is the problem of what Roger mentioned is a very important problem. As a grid distributor, as a distribution grid, we can cover our investment in the grid by putting it in the bill of the customer, in what we call the stamp. But if we would invest in storage for the grid, we would not be able to do that. So this cost cannot be put on the bill, because the Electricity Commission in Switzerland, ELCOM, said that because we are not the only beneficiary of this storage system, we are not allowed to put them on the grid cost. And this is a huge issue, meaning that the storage has to be developed by the private industry, and we have to work hand-in-hand with the private industry. And on top of that, if you look at what happens today in Europe, which is fully liberalized, you have a juridic unbundling between the grid and the rest of the companies, meaning that the capacity to dialogue between the grid people, the storage people, the producing people are decreasing. And in Switzerland today, it's not the case, but if we would go for the European agreement, which has a lot of advantages, especially for the TSO, but for all of us, one of the drawbacks is that our company will have to be unbundled, and my grid people will be separated from the rest of the people, and the dialogue to reach a global system working hand in hand will be much more difficult.
Yeah, this is a very well-known problem of having the DSOs handling or not the distributed energy storage systems, and I agree with what Christian said. Let's say from a technical point of view, it's not complicated to certify that DSOs are not using batteries to do energy arbitrage, because this is the problem, okay? This is why they are impeded to use batteries, because they can potentially make money in shifting energy for, since they're participating in the market. However, technically speaking, it's also possible to use a third-party company, an aggregator, that is controlling distributed energy storage systems, provided that the DSO shares with the aggregator the information about the grid, the state of the grid, such that whatever action the aggregator does is not creating problems on the grid. Now, unfortunately, this is not the case nowadays. So, technically speaking, it's possible, but we are not yet there to this kind of agreement between potential aggregators and DSOs. And I don't think this is the wish of the DSO, but if I'm not mistaken.
You speak about the transportation grids, and this would be it would be possible for the transportation grid to buy also by private batteries, also private-owned batteries, and so on, to buy regulation energy for this. But the problem is optimizing the distribution grids. And this is not a central problem, it's a local problem with local information, and the only one who has the local information is the grid, the distribution grid operator, and it is not allowed to make this arbitrage. But you could say, okay, the local grid is allowed to store energy for 24 hours, 44 hours, so on. And if he is winning some money doing this, then this money is deducted from the cost from the stamps, and then it's neutral. And then we have to overcome this artificial separation between grid and storage, at least for the short-term storage and grid equilibrage of the grid. But even for the long-run storage, I come to this conclusion: it's less expensive to have decentralized hydrogen producing plants and so on than making huge hydrogen plants at 2 or 5 places, and to transport all the excess of electricity in the summer to this point. So also for the seasonal storage, the decentral approach is more promising than a huge central approach.
You're talking about hydrogen now and hydrogen plants, yes. and that will still have to sort of mount the barrier of people saying we don't want that near our house. But I would like to stick to working together or not beforehand. You said, Mario, that the DSOs, they compete against each other, they don't talk to each other, and that would be one of the things needed in order to, get things going. Why is it competition? Why don't you guys talk together?
No, it's wrong. I'm sorry to say it, it's not true. The DSO are not competing among themselves. We are not competitors. We have local monopoly, so we have no point not to discuss together. We have an important project today with Swiss Grid and other DSO to create a crowd balancing platform so that we can create a flexibility market for the private company that will generate or have flexibility so that they can exchange this flexibility. So we are involved in concrete projects together. And we speak together, we have the same issues, and then we gain in knowledge when we speak together. The point that Mario mentioned is that we don't disclose the data that could be useful for the full ecosystem. And the law will start to ask us to share these data on the data hub. And we believe that it would be a good thing to have a national data hub where we can put important data for the industry, and that we can then give this data over to the market, to private players, so that they can better plan their activities and so on. And this is something that is possible. If we give it for free for all, then it's part of a service public service, and we can do it. It has to be regulated. It has to be clear that we all have to do it. You have some security issues and data that, for security reasons, we cannot share because it can fall in bad hands. But for the rest, I think there is, on the conception side, there is nothing against sharing data.
So what does it still need? Policy or what?
They need policy, they need regulation, and regulation that are not contra-incentiving. For example, today, we buy energy for our customers, for the monopoly market. When we buy this energy, we are able to put this cost on the customer. But when we have to modulate this energy that we bought, and then we decide to resell part of this energy because on a given day we have more or less sun, we have maybe purchased too much energy, we have to resell a little bit on the market, the resale of the energy we cannot put on the bill of the customer. So we take the risk on all the reselling part of the energy, which can be a gain or it can be a loss. And we believe it's not normal that we make gain or loss on energy for the monopoly market. And with the exponential increase of solar panels, we have more and more energy to resell, and we resell at risk for us today. And we believe the regulation is not fair on this point because we cannot do the netting of the purchase and the sale we have. And one of the counterintuitive conclusion of that is that my teams might tell me, okay, Christian, if we don't want to bear this risk, we don't purchase in advance. We will have only short position because we can only purchase, but we never have to resell. And the Electricity Commission does not understand this point. They provide us, they don't want us to resell energy because they believe we will do then speculation. And it's not the goal. In my status, speculation is prohibited on the monopoly market. I can't do it.
Would you like to?
Yep. That's absolutely correct. It's one of the issues we have for DSO's operational aspects.
Well, maybe we have to say that we've in the same bill that is on a referendum, put on a referendum on the 9th of June, we partly solve this problem because we make a full separation of the portfolio between the electricity for the household and small business clients with a monopoly, on the electricity we sold on the free market. We elaborate this solution together and then we put it in the law, and now it's on the bill. And I accept that it will contribute to solve this problem, even if you don't have the detail of how the law will be implemented. It's always, you make a law, you make a bill, you make the main principle in the law, and then you have an ordinance with like a micro law, with already changing a little bit the initial idea, and then you have the Electricity Commission who makes its own interpretation of the law, and then sometimes you are slightly at another point that you think initially.
So it sounds like there's a lot of cooks on that meal. Ladies and gentlemen, please do raise your hand if you do have questions for our panelists. We've been talking a lot about grid integration now. I do have one last question for you, because we were talking about policies now. One of the problems Switzerland has is that we don't have this frame contract with the EU. We don't have an electricity agreement. The EU Commission just said now, yes, we can start negotiating again. According to you, the way you see it from a European perspective, but also from a Swiss perspective, how important is it for Switzerland that we're part of this, that we do have an agreement with the EU?
I think it's extremely important. If I look at the transmission grid, Swiss grid, we have 41 interconnections with our neighbors, so we're really part of the European transmission grid. Actually, there's not a Swiss transmission grid, it's really a European transmission grid. and we need each other for balancing. We need each other because we import energy in the winter, we export in the summer. We need to be part of the processes of the discussions. We need to be part of the grid development plans. So for us, for Swiss Grid, it's extremely important. And from a European perspective, well, maybe it's a little less important because Switzerland is not the biggest country in Europe.
Well, we're the heart of Europe, no?
But it is in the center. It is in the center. And it's always been part of NSOE. It was actually one of the starting members, the founding members of NSOE. We're very much involved in all the committees, in all the discussions. Technically speaking, we're very much involved, highly respected.
Do they still look at you the same? Do you still get treated well there?
We still get treated well, but sometimes it's difficult, yeah.
What is?
Sometimes it's complicated. Everything that has to do with the market, we're excluded. So we, in some discussions, we don't take part. If we're looking at the development of the grid, also, everything's being developed around us. So it's getting more and more difficult, and there is definitely a risk that we will be excluded from NSOE.
What would be the worst case scenario? What if we never make an agreement or a contract with the EU and we're being left out? I mean, the power doesn't just stop at the border. What would be the worst case scenario?
Well, first of all, we'd be excluded from NSOE, so we wouldn't be part of all these procedures, all these discussions. There would be also more difficult for us to balance, to participate in the balancing markets.
Which are a problem per se.
Also, well, there are lots of things I could talk about, but also one of the issues is all the flows, the unwanted flows that go through our country, because electricity is obeying physical rules and not. I mean, it's not because France buys electricity from Germany that the electricity is going to go over the border between Germany and France. Some of it is going to go through Switzerland.
And we don't know whether it's coming or not.
No, we don't, because our lines our critical elements are not considered in the capacity calculations that they are doing. And we have all kinds of issues like this.
So, one important point, thank you so much. And I saw one hand raised. Please state your name and then get going.
Hello. My name is Lawrence. Thank you very much for the discussion and the speeches. I have a question for Christian Petit. It comes back on the role of behavioral change for the transition towards 2050. As Roger Nordman said, it would account for a third. I wanted to know whether Romande Energie estimated the role of behavioral change or has some sort of predictions on how much it will matter for the transition. Thank you.
Well, I think we all see the world the same way than Roger mentioned. We believe that in all literature, the consumer have 1/3 of the solution in their hands by changing their habitudes. The new law that Roger mentioned will request from the DSO that we ask our customer to make some economies of using electricity. So we will have a list of potential actions that we can deploy and we can evangelize in the market. And when you see the increasing figures of electricity consumption, the Federal Office of Electricity in Switzerland plan that we will reduce by 30 to 50% the consumption per capita. So we cannot achieve the goal that we have seen on the slide today without having a huge decrease of consumption per capita. And this is doing by behavioral change, by insulation of houses, by changing mobility patterns, and so on.
May I be a little bit cynical on that point? To try to induce behavioral change, I think that's one of the most difficult things there is. If something is to be had, cheap, and it comes out of the, you just plug it in, or be it a bigger car or whatever, if the means are there, if the money is there and people can have it, they will use it and do it. How can you induce behavioral change? Roger Nordman.
It's a huge part of my book, because I was impressed by all the COVID politics. It was very for me, interrogation. Most people were able to change their behavior during COVID for a few months, but not that was. And you have frequently in the public discussion all recommendations, you shouldn't do this, you should do this, and so on, over thousands of topics. And my learning from COVID are, it's very difficult to change a lot of attitudes. You can change some if you are convinced, and if you have the guarantee that the other people do also, and if you have the guarantee that all technical stuff can be done has been done. And that's the reason why I'll always come with the 2/3 and 1/3. I say we have to do the 2/3 so that the people accept the last third. And in the last third, sorry, but it's not going to reduce the electricity consumption of your e-bike. It's not important. You have to reduce your flying consumption, to eat a little less meat, and to use CO2 neutral concrete. Those are the main levels. And we have on the behavior to concentrate on the main changes. And this is also a cultural aspect, and there are synergies between technical change and the behavior change. For instance, if you make a cycling way, then which is a technical change, then you can change your behavior. If you make a high-speed train, then you can avoid to fly, and so on. There are synergy between both, or not. It's a stupid opposition to construct a tension between technical investigation and the behavior change.
So basically, you say that there would have to be technical incentives, or maybe remuneration or financial incentives to get the people to do things differently. Because I mean, you write in your book as well that self-responsibility, it's not working.
No, it's also because as an individual, as a person, as a single human being, you have few things you can change alone. Some of your behavior you can change alone. You can fly less, eat less meat. But already the building in which you are living is done with concrete, and the transportation you have to go to for your everyday life can be maybe public transportation, but it's not said. On the plastic you buy when you buy food or and so on is done in the Chinese industry where you have no influence. So the main part of the climate problem is a collective problem of collective organization, of economical organization, of investment. And we have to decide this and to do this at the political level, at the business level. And then, for the last mile, you can move the behaviors. But it's an illusion to make moral lessons all the time to the people on stuff where they don't have any influence. And this is the reason also why we do the Climate Fund initiative. We think that it is necessary to make huge investment. And those investments are mostly collective or collectively incentivized, like insulation of houses. It's not the state who is making it, but the state is sustaining it.
The Climate Fund initiative is part of your book. I'll get to that in a second, but the gentleman here has been waiting to ask his question.
Yes, thank you, Roger. By the way, this collective organization of society is what we will be discussing in tonight's panel at 6, which I will be moderating. My name is Sasha Nick. And when I think about many of the problems in the electricity market today, linked to the grid, but also generation and use, they are the consequence of the past 20 or 30 years of an ideology of market liberalization, which of course have created the problems. But that was in the past. As we look forward, we have issues like more renewable energy, intermittency, different uses, etc., which will create additional problems. So what I'm trying to get to with my question is, can you help us disentangle which of the problems could be solved by simply releasing this constraint of market liberalization of the energy market? In other words, if we could get some different organization that doesn't need to be the market, which problems would be solved and which problems would remain, and they require a different solution?
I would, is that for Mario?
It's not for anyone specific, but
Okay.
I think Mario would be a very good person to start.
All right, thank you.
Well, we discussed on this subject many times with Sasha. Let's say that from a purely optimization point of view, and when I say optimization, I mean planning optimization and operational optimization, having a monopoly is the best solution. Because a monopoly can supply any planning and optimization algorithm, and I'm looking at the students, with a certitude of information on the grid, the demand, and the production, okay? Only an ideal market can achieve the same results, right? From an economical standpoint. The problem in markets is that many of these markets are unfortunately imperfect. And just to mention, looking at the Swiss grid counterpart, you know the Picasso platform? Picasso is the platform for sharing frequency restoration reserve. In the last months, has been a chaos. Italy joined since a few months. They had to take out Italy because essentially the market was going all over the place. I mean, we were shooting at regulation prices for a megawatt hour at 3,000 euros. 3,000 euros per megawatt hour of regulating power, of regulating energy, sorry. So it's a big question, actually. I had the pleasure to have in my office many years back, I used to say this anecdote many times, maybe your students know, the CEO of State Grid in China, and I was provoking him saying, are you going to liberalize the market? You know, China is a bit complicated system. And then he replied to me, he looked at my eyes and said, my mission is to deliver the cheapest and most reliable kilowatt hour to each single Chinese. And if you look at the progress that China is doing in hosting renewables, they are going at a pace that in Europe we can only dream about.
But it's also got to do with the political system that's like...
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. So replying to your question is, we need more fairness in the market and more wise design of the markets, which is not the case nowadays.
May I just follow up? This is great, Mario. So if we get the market cannot even in theory in a perfect market work because the mechanism of the market is the price. And here we need additional information beyond price. So even with perfect price transparency, it still wouldn't work.
Yeah,
simply because of what's transmitted. But if we got the monopoly at whatever scale, what problems would remain linked to renewables?
The problem is that some of the social welfare costs are related to the infrastructure, which is not going through a market. If we look at the concept of locational marginal prices, essentially you are getting a price which is per node, essentially in the point where you are connected. So if you take into account these aspects, the market will be unfair. Because it will depend on the place where you're injecting the power, the cost you're getting for selling and for buying electricity. So at the moment, the cost of the infrastructure is not part of the market. It's something that the operators are quantifying and then transferring to the bill.
Nell was just shaking her head.
The infrastructure is a monopoly.
Well, for transportation and distribution, but not for production. Frequently, for the energy, I am only speaking on the energy because when we say market, it's only the market for energy because distribution is a monopoly. And the problem is, historically, it was a monopoly because the one who has the grid has also the production and distribution. In all Europe, we artificially did open a market, separate grid from production. And it's a market who has an intrinsical failing because most of the electricity production types have low marginal cost of production because the sun, the wind, the water, they are for free. and nuclear energy has low variable cost, and all have huge investment costs. And once you have invested, you agree to produce, you produce every time you cover your marginal cost, even if you don't cover your full cost of amortization. And for this reason, most of the time, the prices of electricity is under the full cost level. It's okay for old plants who are already amortized, but for the new one, it's very difficult. And everybody speaks from a market, but in Europe, you have over 500 regime for sustaining investment in renewable energy, because otherwise it's not possible to invest. And you have the support of nuclear energy. I am not one of those, but they also ask for statal support because they have the same problem. They have the huge investment at the beginning, at the end of life, on low marginal costs, but since the price is mostly low, they can cover the initial cost and also not the end of the life cost. And this is the reason for me why we have to make a separation between short and long run. For the short run, deciding if Mario is using electricity, if I am loading my Tesla or my bike, if you are producing electricity on your roof, for this the market is okay because it shows a very fast signal by the price. But for deciding if he is building a new storage power, water storage power plant to take 10 years, or if I am building a new wind plant to take 20 years in Switzerland, the market doesn't work. And this is for the reason for the existence of the infrastructure. We have to have a collective decision and refinancing system that we have actually with the KEF. And you can only for the short run, you can rely on the market, in my opinion.
Okay. Thank you. Let me just hand the microphone over to you, and then we'll get back to that initiative I promised. Okay.
Okay. Hello, my name is Genera. I'm part of the ERF team, and I have a question for Nell. Is the need for a regulatory framework at European level discussed? I know the EU mandates the NSOE to report with the ERAA, so the European Resource Adequacy Assessment. I know the EU mandates NSOE to draft this report. What is it meant for? Is there any other tool or body who's currently working in that direction, regulatory framework at European level for the electricity market?
So I didn't understand your question, the end of your
My
question.
question
Is there another, you said that the NSOE is in charge of the European Resource Assessment, that's
Exactly.
correct?
What is it meant for, and is there any other tool or
So
body that is currently...
it's looking into what are the adequacy needs for Europe until 2050.
But is
and
that
how-
working in the direction of having a regulatory framework for the electricity market?
So
European
NSOE
level?
is not doing the regulatory framework, and so he's doing the assessment of what the adequacy needs are. And obviously, they're looking, I mean, they're expecting an enormous increase in all the renewable energy, whether it be offshore wind. There's a huge increase expected in offshore wind, on wind inland, and also on photovoltaic. So the wind would be more in the sea basins up north and the photovoltaic in the south. But it's not NSOE is going to be doing the regulations. That's going to be done at the European Commission level.
And okay, so you probably don't know whether this need for regulation is actually something that is discussed at European level, or is it something
So
that...
NSOE obviously is consulted, joins the discussions with the European Commission, with the Commissioner for Energy. They're considered as a technical partner, if you like.
Okay.
So NSOE is an association of TSOs.
Thank you so much. I see further questions back there. While I hand the cube to you, I can actually toss it, it's not going to break. But let me just get to that before time's up. Roger, you said we need to start this climate fund. Somebody has to pay the bill. I've read in your book as well, investment into infrastructure or that, like for companies, it's difficult to just go and say, hey, we're spending so and so much money on new stuff. I would like to have you talk about the initiative just now, but Christian, I mean, in regard of financing new things, is it a problem for the distributors, for the local companies? Do you agree with that, or what would you need when it comes to money?
Well, we have different kind of activities usually, so you have to separate in your question probably the monopoly situation, basically the investment in the distribution grid. Here we have a clear financing path, so we are incentivized to invest because basically all the investment we do, we can put the amortization of this investment in the stamp that the customer will pay, and we have a margin that is decided by the federal department, which is fixed every year. Around 4% return on investment. And here we pay attention to the political debate because today the bill is considered as to be too high. The grid costs are increasing, will increase in the future. And the temptation of Mr. Price and the Welcome is to put pressure on us that the return on investment will decrease. So obviously you can decide every year to decrease the return on investment we have on our investment, but these people should not forget that if we are in a monopoly situation to invest, we are not in a monopoly situation to borrow money, because we need borrowers that give us the money to invest. And if we cannot guarantee high enough return on investment, we will find nobody to rent us, to give us the money to invest in. So this is an issue that we have to consider. We must have a fair return on investment. It must not be too high because it's a public service. But if it's too low, then the price of the money is not high enough. This is a monopoly market. So I think here the incentivization is good, with an exception that the more you have auto-consumptions, the more people do consume their own electricity, the less electron you have on the grid, then the higher the price will be on the transported electrons. So we have to pay attention to that. The grid is a mutualization of cost, and the mutualization has to remain, even if people tend to be more and more autonomous.
So it needs a policy change as well?
No, we need to have tariffs that enable us to invoice not only the electron, but also the power taken by the consumer. If a consumer builds an autonomous house, he still needs to have 2 or 3 times a year, maybe, access to the network to take energy. And we have to invoice him the power he needs and not the true electrons he will take over the year. For the rest, meaning basically the production plant that Roger mentioned, here we are in an open market. The market is open European-wide, so it's a private decision. I invest in a dam, I invest in a wind farm or not. And for this, obviously, you invest for the long term and you take a certain risk according to the price level of the market. And obviously here you need some support, as Roger mentioned, some state guarantee that if you don't have a minimal tariff return for your electricity, you will not invest. And this is a long-term point that Roger mentioned.
Well, maybe a few words. We only spoke about electricity, and this is the most easiest part of the transformation. Producing enough electricity, transporting enough electricity. Storage is already a little more difficult, but not so. But we have other aspects that are very difficult. Decarbonizing industry, because industry is in a hard cost competition. You have, for example, decarbonizing the garbage plant, burning plant. You have decarbonizing maybe once the aviation. You have transforming the cement industry, concrete industry, or making negative emission, and so on. There are a lot of different topics. And I calculated with the full program to decarbonize, except aviation, we have to invest every year 2.2% of the gross domestic product into the transformation. It seems huge. It's 17 billion Swiss francs a year. But at the time of our grandparents, they built the digs, the hydropower plants, and they invested only for the electricity until 4% of the GDP in the 60s, 4% of the GDP in the energy system. So if our grandparents could do it at that time, we are able to invest 2.5% of the GDP for making for achieving in Switzerland the climate neutrality. But it will not be possible only with the market, and it's not possible only with taxes, because like a levy, like CO2 levy and so on. And the best way to, you don't only have to invest, but you have to be sure that your investments are used. And if you subsidize the invest in efficiency or renewable, then the marginal cost of using them is very low, and you can throw away the fossil energy from the market. And this is the key idea. Instead of using CO2 or emitting CO2 more expensive, I say it's politically an impossible way, and it has also some technical limits. We better subsidize the investment that are necessary for this, but with a very different. You don't have to subsidize electrical car because it's already attractive to buy an electrical car. But you have to subsidize strongly a seasonal electricity storage or industry or decarbonizing a garbage plant. And for this reason, we say we need a state fund to do this. And the state fund can borrow money for this, for financing this, about 1% of the GDP every year, because it is an investment, and Switzerland will be more rich after having done this investment than if it doesn't do this investment. It was to do it. It's like the new Alpine train line through the Alps. It was 20 billion Swiss francs. We voted about it 25 years ago. It was a 15-year building, very difficult building. But at the end, it's very useful. We are very happy. And if one of the 4 tunnels has a problem for half a year, it's a national catastrophe because we don't go that fast in the scene. And it shows that investments are very useful, and they seem huge when you decide about them, but when you have done them, it's very useful.
But you say we need a state fund, we need a climate fund, so where's the money for the fund come from?
Clearly borrowing. In German, you have the confusion between fault and debt. It's the same word, Schuld. But it's not a fault to borrow money to invest. It's a good thing. And if you don't invest, you get poorer. If you invest, you have more prosperity. And this is the reason why I think we can do public borrowing for this. It would put the national debt from 40% of the GDP to about 65% of the GDP. And it's not at all a problem to do this investment. It would be a problem if we don't solve the climate crisis and if we still rely in 25 years on oil and gas.
Agreed, the rest of you? Mm-hmm. You say yes, Nell?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a fact. If you look at the 60s and 70s, the largest infrastructure investments were in the power grids, power production assets, and this is not the case after the 90s. Actually, the unbundling of the system was really slowing down the investment in the electricity infrastructure because there was no interest from the investors. That's a fact. So,
you have a very funny graphic in my book from
visible for all.
From 1950. You see a peak of investment in the 60s, a small one in the 70s. There were the nuclear power plant, the 2 bigs, and then in 40 years we aren't investing. It's the problem. It's like if you have an old car, it's cheap to drive, but one day you have to replace it, and we are at the point where we have to reinvest. everywhere.
Well, the dramatic situation for the energy transition is that the states in Europe had to face the COVID situation with a lot of public expenses, and now they spend their money in tanks, in munitions, in
Now it goes to military.
it goes to military at a level of 2% of domestic product, and this is the crazy situation. Instead of investing in our future, due to a crazy guy in the east of Europe, we are now spending all this money for nothing.
Actually, could I quickly have the cube? Just not trying to kill you, but I know we do have a lady who also works for the EU Commission here, and she's actually got a chart on what worries people in Europe the most. And climate and electricity, that's way in the back, that's moved back. And what's winning?
Yeah, indeed, according to the last survey made in December 23, the main concern of European people are immigration and the war in Ukraine. And the climate change falls to the position number 5, 16%, meaning that is not a concern, or less concern than the other. And energy supply, only 11% of Europeans think that is a problem, that is a concern. So meaning that there is no, the ordinary people do not consider climate and energy supply as a problem. And this is the last results made in Europe, December 23.
That would actually be a really sad note to send this panel on that.
Yes, this is true, but if you take what the Confederation considers as the biggest risk for the country is the lack of supply of energy. The cost of that would be huge. So maybe the public does not see that this is an issue, but if we would not have energy enough,
we sort of need to hope for a blackout and then things are going.
I used to say in the power community that sometimes you need a pedagogical blackout. Not for the operators, that's for the people.
I'd just like to say a blackout is a structural issue. I mean, it's not a lack of energy, okay? Because often we're using this term and people get confused. But a blackout is because you've had a series of events that actually lead to a loss of elements in the transmission system, and then lack of energy is another problem. It's not a blackout.
But isn't it? I mean, you're getting to the point of it.
It can help lead to a blackout. But.
And that's one of the points. I think the entire issue for the sort of electric community, it's all understandable. For the normal person, it is so complex and it's so hard to understand. I'd rather not discuss it. Agree?
Yeah, but still, it's lack of energy is something different.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to make such a distinction. I mean, security of supply is something, a blackout is something else. However, there are some technicalities, I hope you agree with me, associated with the penetration of renewables that makes a blackout more likely to happen, which is something that normal people don't know. And we started to see some critical events in other continents, like in Australia in 2016. They experienced a blackout in South Australia that was clearly associated to renewables and to technical misunderstanding of the role of renewables in the balancing system. So we need to be careful about that.
Because renewables is totally different. I mean, it's a lot more volatile, a lot more difficult to forecast. So these are things that we also have to develop now. We have to go much more into forecasting and understanding how the flows are going to change. Whereas in the past, at least in Switzerland, we had the production in the valley and in the nuclear power plants, and it was very stable, easy to forecast, going from the production to the distribution sites, and the flows were usually always in the same direction. And today it's completely different. You can have the wind in the north of Europe, and you can have maybe 5,000 megawatts in one direction and then 5,000 megawatts in another direction when the wind stops blowing. So it's really totally different.
But are the high voltage grids, like the big grids, national, international, they're fit and ready for it?
we're fit and ready for it, but as Mario said, we're going to have a lot more balancing issues.
With the reserve?
A lot more forecasting issues to deal with, yeah.
Thank you so much, Nel. And the gentleman back there has been waiting for a long time. Do you still want to ask a question?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, go ahead. And then we're wrapping it up for lunch.
Yeah, so my name is Thiago, and I had a question about timing. So now we know that we have more constraints about PV. It's not like you put PVs and everything's fine. So does the costs and grid constraints, most likely, don't allow us to get to net zero to 2050, or isn't it a problem and it's okay like that?
I did not understand the end of the question.
So it's just, does the constraints that we added about the grid and the costs, will we fail the net zero by 2050 because of these constraints, or?
No.
Can we still reach net zero by 2050?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. You're just worrying about the constraints can be always relaxed or shifted with investments, with new technologies. We're talking about, there is an elephant in the room, is flexible demand, okay, that has a huge potential. Remember that the way we are handling the power grid is with inflexible demand and a generation following. But we never discussed very seriously and massively generation following demand. Okay, that has a huge potential.
Well, basically, it's what I propose. I propose to
many people are proposing
to make hydrogen in summer for the industry, not in winter, so that you have a massive change in the profile of demand.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is very one of the possibilities. Peak shaving is another one, who is also interesting. Another point is less heating in winter because it's becoming higher, and more demand for cooling in summer. It's also shifting. We cannot make an exact prediction of everything in 25 years. We have to advance with a range of flexibilities and options.
Maybe, yeah, so have you two, to wrap it up, answer the question as well. Do you think we'll still be able to make net zero at 2050, or are there too many constraints to get there on time?
Absolutely.
Absolutely yes or absolutely
yes,
no?
Yes, we have to, and we will.
We have to and we will?
Yeah.
No, we see now that we are on the curve. If you see in Switzerland, the increase of electricity coming from PV, it's a huge explosion. Obviously, when you create a new decentralized stochastic system, you face new problems, but we will face it. The only issue we have is for the technical guys here is you have roughly 20 years difference between the maturity of renewable production plants and the maturity of storage for the network. And how can we close the gap? By research, by development, by doing all these projects. But I'm confident we have to be there in 25 years. The whole industry is going there. The difficulty is if we have stop and go, and if we change decision, and if we fear ourselves, and if we don't believe in the plan. And today I see some risk on that, because you have some populist opinion that trying to tell us we will not achieve it and we have to take shortcuts. But we can go back to the nuclear plant in Switzerland. We can, but it's an illusion to believe that nuclear will come without problems.
And on time.
We will discover huge new problems, because we have lost momentum in this industry for 20 years. We have not invested in. We don't have the skills. We don't have made enough research. The fourth generation of power plant, of nuclear power plant, is not there yet. So it will not help us for the next 20 years. So maybe we have to start again to put research on it, to have new, that university will open again some research on it. It's everything open. But we have now 25 years time to make the transition. It's possible if we all go in the same direction. Yes, it's possible. We have the solution to do it.
And whether it's in the nuclear section or wherever, what I also read in your book, Roger, is we need a lot more manpower. We need a lot more engineers who actually study engineering and who will start taking on the task.
Absolutely. If I may add something on that, since we are with an audience of young people, there is an interesting analysis done by Irina a few years ago, saying that to realize the energy transition globally, we need to almost triplicate the number of engineers in the area of energy systems. If we don't do that, we will be simply incapable to implement energy transition. So it's not only about infrastructure, money, markets, but it's also about human resources.
And you are in the right field. Thank you so much, the panel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for participating thus far. Have a good lunch, and we'll meet back here at 1:30. Please make sure you're on time so we can start accordingly. Gute, merci.